Welcome to the Venn diagram, the show that covers the intersection of politics, business, language, and culture.
Indeed. I think this is our third episode, but it's labeled episode 2 because we started the numbering at 0 for some reason.
Totally fine. I think we're doing it Hollywood style. I think that's how you do it. Like if we were like Warner Brothers Studios producing Friends, that's what it would be, right?
Exactly. Well, tell us a little bit about the Venn diagram, what we're doing here today, Michael.
All right. Well, this is sort of a teaser for the Global Readiness Forum call. It's an invite-only call that happens on Fridays every 2 weeks. And this is sort of more of an open forum to talk about a lot of the issues that we cover during that call. There are things that involve business, politics, culture from around the world, and things that impact global brands and global businesses, or any brand or business that wants to be global.
Indeed, and it's a lot of fun that we talk about, and it's so much fun that we want to share it with everybody else. So let's get right into the agenda that we have today.
And cut the red velvet rope, and we want to share this with everybody. The agenda for today, and who knows how much of this will get you, but we're going to try to get to a lot of it. There's a lot of pretty meaty stuff here to talk about. One is that Iceland cut its work week to 4 days, I believe it was, and they found that there was greater happiness and no loss of productivity. In the next bit of news, we're going to look at what many perceive
in related news, I may be moving to Iceland.
Completely. Well, you actually said it was related news. I was going to say completely unrelated to that. Iceland looks good.
Exactly.
We're also going to be talking about the Roma community and various exonyms. In other words, names applied to an ethnic group from people outside that ethnic group to the Roma community, and then adopted to be used for other things. And we're going to also talk about a sports commentator from American channel ESPN, which is owned by Disney and partners with ABC and Marvel and everyeverything.
Isn't everything owned by Disney?
Pretty much everything is owned by Disney. Yeah, it's kind of like in
we're just gonna become one of those podcasts on YouTube that just bitches about Nimsy or Nimsy. Oh my goodness! I wish there were podcasts that bitched about Nimsy, that bitched about Disney all the time. People make a good living out of it.
That's true. That's very true. And so Stephen A. Smith, he had some things to say about a rising star in Major League Baseball, and they were somewhat controversial, and so we'll take a look at those as well. But let's jump right in. And I don't know how much there is to talk about. Well, actually, there's a lot to talk about depending on the angle. But talking about Iceland and its work week. So a 4-day work week, no damage to productivity from what studies show, and greater happiness. Let's
just read this for folks that are perhaps listening in the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Yeah.
So Iceland cuts its work week and found greater happiness and no loss in productivity. Research out of Iceland has found that working fewer hours for the same pay led to improved well-being among workers with no loss in productivity. In fact, in some places, workers were more productive after cutting back their hours. So they're more productive. The trials were conducted from 2015 to 2019. That's interesting. Workers went from a 40-hour week scheduled to a 35 or 36-hour weekly schedules without a reduction in pay. The trials were launched after agitation from labor unions and grassroots organizations that pointed to Iceland's low rankings among its Nordic neighbors when it comes to work-life balance. As many people contemplate a future in which they do not need to commute to offices, the idea of working less altogether has its appeal. Discussion questions. Discussion questions. Let's discuss it. I don't think we need discussion questions here.
Right.
But very interesting findings. And right now, remote, hashtag remote work, hashtag virtual office, it's coming back into trending a little bit here because, and as it did when it first started out, when we first kicked off into 2020, because of reasons that happened there. But now it's coming back because people are going back to the office, right?
Right.
So what's
happening? some people aren't really that happy with going back to the office. And then I want to, let me sort of go back on what I said, because I said they switched to a 4-day work week. It wasn't completely 4-day. It was 35 to 36 hours. So that could be split up in different ways. And of course you could work 4 days and work 40 hours still. So it's really about the reduction in hours. I can see why there would be an uptick in productivity for a lot of people. And really there are studies that back up the idea that there is kind of a cap on how productive you can be in a given day anyway, or at least how productive you can be at a stretch. And there can be a focus in the corporate world on sort of the optics of being busy and the optics of showing up without actually contributing that much value.
The looking busy. And I don't know
Exactly.
if you're listening to this and you've ever had a job where you've been so stressed out about looking busy, then I feel you. Because to me, like the stress of having to look busy in those companies, and it's a culture thing in the companies, the stress of having to look busy and sound busy and signal how busy you are is actually more stressful than actually being busy with real value-added work.
Precisely, because when you're actually engaged in your task, when you're focused on what you're doing, and you've got that kind of busyness going on, well, then you're not necessarily, I mean, you could be stressed about whatever task it is you're focused on, but you're right. You don't have that secondary stress of, oh, I have to make sure that I'm signaling how busy I am all the time, that I'm telegraphing with everything that I'm doing, with my body language, with everything, how busy and therefore how presumably productive I am. So yeah, no, it can be a lot of stress, and I can see how this would pay some really big dividends. Now, the question is, are U.S. companies, and not just U.S. companies, I mean, the overwork and the overtime culture in Japan is mind-bogglingly intense sometimes. So are other countries culturally ready to accept this? Because
yeah, it's just kind of work culture. Work culture is so different around the world. And, speaking as we both grew up in America, and I would argue that America doesn't have that great as far as like a healthy work culture. We are very proud of our work culture, the quote unquote Protestant work ethic, right? Hard days work, getting your hands dirty, that whole shtick that we have here in America. But at the end of the day, like how useful is that? Because we're moving into an economy where things aren't, wealth isn't so much created by like what you can build. It's created more like what ideas that you have, and it's scalability over traditional production, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Which
makes me wonder here in Iceland, how are they? Is this just for hourly worker? Because it's a foreign thing to me. Because like when you tell me like, hey, Tucker, you want to work a 4-day work week? And it's like every job that I've had since I was 20 years old was a salaried job where I was working nights and weekends anyways.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So when you say, hey, let's move to a 4-day work week, I immediately think, okay, so that I can work on 3 of my days off instead of 2 of my days off. Right?
Right. Well, okay, so then, I mean, this is the teacher in me coming out, but then I would turn that around and ask, why were you working nights and weekends? Was that an external pressure that was placed on you? Was that something internal saying that you needed to do that? And what did you gain something tangible or something you wanted from that?
Well, my knee-jerk reaction when you asked that question was, why did I work so hard? It's basically a crippling lack of self-confidence and self-esteem. But I don't think it's that. I think I've worked very consciously in my life. Like when I first got my job at We Localize for example. That
Hmm.
was years and years and years ago. But I was moving from a smaller company. I was moving from glyph language to we localized. So it's like, oh, the big leagues, yay!
Right.
And I told myself, and it was a different phase in my life. I was single. I was, well, more or less, I was single. I didn't have kids, et cetera, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
told myself, I'm not going to say no for the
Mm,
first 6 months. Anyone asks me to do
right.
something, I'm going to say yes. And I look back
Hmm.
on that now, and I'm just like, what horrible advice to give myself. Like that's just boundaries, boundaries, Tucker.
Hmm.
But I don't want to
Absolutely.
turn into like the Tucker anecdote show. Let's. Do we have anything else on Iceland here that we want to get over?
I don't know that we have that much on Iceland, but I think, you know what? I feel like your anecdote was actually really useful. And it's, we can segue to something else,
T-
but
t-
I think it's good for people to think about why we've set up the work culture in whatever country you're watching this from. Why is the work culture in your country set up the way that it is? And is it actually leading to the goals that it purports to lead to? There are a lot of things that we do for, we say it's for a particular reason without ever really stopping to think, okay, is X thing getting Y result that we tell ourselves that it's going to? So, but no, I think there's a lot to think about there.
Well,
Absolutely.
and especially for those of us, working in global organizations, which, if you're watching this on multilingual media's channel, chances are you're working in a global
You're
organization.
probably,
You
yeah,
are our target demographic. Um,
yes, yes,
and so you have to navigate these complexities for all of your different
100%.
teams. And
Absolutely.
it was challenging 18 months ago, and it's challenging now, and it will be challenging in 18 months from now
I was
because
just going to say,
the world changes. You know,
that's right. And yeah, exactly. It is not likely to get any less challenging.
let's look at
So
this.
the
Let's get into
next,
the news here. Where are we starting with the
yes,
full agenda?
I would like to start in, excuse me, I keep touching my eyes. So I live in Greece
Dr.
and
Fauci would
it's,
be appalled, sir,
I know,
touching your
right?
face.
I'm not, but I'm vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. No, I live in Greece and it is currently 36 degrees Celsius here. And so I have an air conditioner going and it's kind of hitting me right here. And so it's making my eyes water.
Yeah, well,
Um,
so
I would like,
for the record, before we were live on air, Michael and I were talking about the weather in Fahrenheit. So I don't want him to get away with
yes.
just pretending to be Greek now.
We were, but then I was looking at my computer and my computer's in Celsius. I
Of
was like,
course it is.
I'm not going to do
All right,
that calculation
in
again.
the news, we're burning
All
daylight
right.
here.
I want to talk about
Whoops,
actually the Roma story, if
Roma.
we can, because I think this is a, this is an important one.
I just realized
Um,
I think I may have used the term gypsy in the title. If that's the case, I will update that as soon as this is over with. Just
that's,
I was reading about
and we're
gypsy
going to talk
moths,
about,
and all
yeah,
right.
there we go.
Well, and this is what we're going to
So,
talk about. Why
yeah,
shouldn't I
this is
use the word
precisely what we're going to
gypsy
talk about.
in the title? Who is that disrespectful to, etc.
There are a lot of Roma communities that find, and out of, I don't know what the consensus is on it, and it is not a community of which I am a part, so I don't have the right to say how offensive or not it is. Just out of deference to people who might be offended, I
Fair
won't
enough.
use the term.
Fair enough.
But this is a live issue for a lot of people. And to be sure, we'll say the G word. I am not a fan of euphemisms, but again, it's not my business to speak on it, so I won't. That has been perceived as a slur to a lot of people, and objectively, it has been used in a very negative way, in a very pejorative way, in different expressions in different countries. And so I can certainly see why people would, uh, as they say, feel some kind of way about it. Like that's very legitimate. I really understand where people are coming from with that. Now, the G word has not been understood to be pejorative by people who are not of that community for quite a long time, and therefore it has lent itself to the names of different species of insect, different species of plant, etc., including some invasive species of the same.
Well,
and now there's a move to
And
take that name
let's
off
just
of.
clarify though, because you say it hasn't, the term gypsy has not
Mhm,
been thought of as offensive by non-Roma people. So it has
mhm,
been
mhm,
applied to different terms, like the gypsy
mhm.
moth. Now,
Right.
that's not to be confused with the fact that the term gypsy has been morphed or weaponized into potentially derogatory
Yes.
terms, like gypped,
Absolutely.
right? And I grew
Absolutely.
up
Yeah.
saying
That's and
gypped,
that was one
and
of the
I
first
had
I was
no
thinking. Yes.
idea. I had no idea what the etymology, etymology
Mhm.
or entomo. See, I'm looking at pictures of a bug, and I'm trying to figure out
Etymology.
entomology. All right,
Oh, well, if we're
here's the
talking about
bug.
bugs,
Here's the bug.
entomology.
Yeah,
Yes.
entomology. This is what I'm looking at. That's why I'm like etymology.
Oh,
So
okay. Yeah.
yeah, I wasn't aware of the etymology of the word. I didn't know where. I didn't know there was a group of people called Roma, or I didn't even know that there was a group of people called Gypsies. Well, I mean, I watched The Hunchback of Notre
Mhm.
Dame, right? But
Right.
that was about
Right.
it.
Right.
So
Well,
yeah,
and
I just want to draw that
that's
distinction because I don't think everybody that's using a derogatory term like that is using it with bad
mhm.
intentions. The
Oh,
idea is just
100%.
awareness, not hey, you can't do
100%.
this.
100%.
Yeah.
I am very sure that there are people out there to this, like, and literally as we speak, who are using the term with zero ill intent. I have no problem believing that. I think it's a difficult thing because, in a way, this kind of goes to what you were just saying. It's an ethnic group that a lot of people, I think, only sort of realize are an ethnic group in the sort of the periphery of their consciousness, at least in the United States. The understanding of this is very different in Europe, by the way, in many places in Europe, including where I live here in Greece. But it's one of those things where, for example, in the UK, especially in the US, issues around African American or people of African descent, that's kind of immediate for a lot of people, right? People really get what's going on with those things. You pretty much know which words are going to cause offense and which ones are going to be safer, quote unquote. With this ethnic group, I think the understanding is a little bit different, and I think there's also been a way in which it was thought of that it was sort of okay for that group to be relegated to the margins. Um, and there is a move, and I've seen this in the works for a few years, to for Roma people to really sort of reclaim their identity, uh, and say, hey, no, we are an actual people. We're not a caricature. We're an actual people. We're an actual ethnic group. We're an actual culture. We have an actual language, or could be thought of as many languages because the dialects have kind of had quite a bit of spread over the years. And we're not just there to be made fun of or to be the boogeymen that you say, are going to steal your children, or to be somebody to be blamed when there's crime in your neighborhood or something like that. And understand too that this is a live issue in other places much more than it is, say, in the United States, because the percentage of the population is much bigger. In Bulgaria, I believe Roma people make up some 10% of the population.
Really?
Yeah. So, or people of Roma
Well,
descent,
let
whether they still hold to the culture or not.
let
So,
let me just read this here once again for our listeners at home. Because we've been talking about Roma here for quite a while, but it may not be immediately apparent what the issue here, and it's
this is true.
the
And I keep forgetting that we're a podcast now too. So
yeah,
I
I
need
keep
to be
trying to
better about
remind myself of that as well. So, an invasive species has an ethnic slur in its common name, and entomologists are changing that. Um, Entomologists, of course, study bugs. So, in June of 2021, the Entomological Society of America initiated efforts to stop use of the derogatory term gypsy, voting to remove gypsy moth and gypsy ant from a list of common names used to refer to the insects. They will go by their Latin names until new common names are chosen. I'm glad we didn't list the Latin names because then I would have to try to pronounce them. Margareta Mateche, director of Roma program at the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard, was consulted as a part of the name removal. She said the change, although it seems small, is relevant in the conversations about the rights of Romani people. Words have power, and more so, she says. Racial slurs like the G word have been particularly offensive and dangerous for Romani people. We have been constantly dehumanized through the means of language and links to insects, animals, criminality, opulence. End quote. Oh, no, not end quote. Continue quote. Changing the name of this insect is very relevant in rectifying the mainstream narratives about Romani people. Our people history and culture have been too often misrepresented and mocked, and prejudice has always been used to justify anti-Roma racism and discrimination against Romani people across the world. So that is the challenge that we're looking at here. And as we were chit-chatting here, I was just looking at what is the FXB Center for Health. I'm assuming this this lady is Romani. She identifies as Romani. It's interesting to me that the this is coming out of Harvard. It's coming out of America, right? Like she may be Romani, but. Isn't this a European issue, or more of a? I don't want to say like, hey, this is European or this is an American issue. We're all in this together, et cetera, et cetera. Right. But it's like the same way that the analogy you used earlier about like the Africans in America, African Americans. That's a very American thing.
Right. And it does. On the one hand, I can definitely see it being thought of as a more European thing because, like I say, that the population. By percentage of population, for example, there are many more Roma people in Bulgaria than there are in the United States. I think the population in the United States is some million or so people, but there's 320 people, 320 million people in the United States. So as a portion of the population, that's vanishingly small.
Right.
So I think it's very tempting to think of it like that. I think part of what it is that though the percentage of the population may be smaller in the United States, perhaps Romani groups and anybody out there who knows more about it than I do, please feel free to correct me, but that maybe they feel like they have a bit more room for having some agency in terms of shifting the narrative. Then they might.
It's just interesting because I've never met someone, or maybe perhaps I have.
Right.
Perhaps I have. America's a melting pot. So
right.
All right.
You didn't know.
What's next? What's next here? Let's burn through this so that we don't have to do a lightning round. I'm pretty sure we'll still have to do a lightning round at the end, but
we might anyway. This isn't going to take too long, but I just think it's interesting. The Spanish Film Festival, San Sebastian International Film Festival, switching to gender-neutral awards. So instead of Best Actor, Actress.
All right, let's do this right. Let's do this right. I'll read it. I'll read it to start with my podcaster voice. Spanish Film Festival shifts to gender-neutral awards. So, Spain's San Sebastian International Film Festival announced on June 22nd that its acting awards will this year be gender-neutral for the first time. The silver shell for Best Actor and Best Actress are to be replaced by the silver shell for Best Leading Performance and Best Supporting Performance. The move follows a similar step taken by the Berlin Film Festival held last March, and is part of a growing trend. The change arises from the conviction that gender, a social and political construct, is no longer a criterion that we follow to distinguish between performances. The festival director, Jose Luis Rebordinos, said the criterion for the jury will be to distinguish between good and bad performances. So,
I don't know that there's necessarily too much to talk about here other than to say that than to reinforce the idea that it really is part of a growing trend. I mean, we hear a lot
Is
about
it?
gender
Is
neutral.
it, though?
I think it is.
Because this, to me, looks like it's the opposite of other trends that I've been seeing. Because,
How so? I mean,
so
maybe you're right, but
trends
I want to hear
to
more.
identify, label, and support, call out, whatever your
Mhm.
terminology, more and more and more genders and gender identifications. That's what,
Mm,
there's that trend that's pushing towards celebrating more genders rather
right.
than being inclusive of all genders. There's that trend, and then there's this, which is going the other way. It's just saying,
Right.
because if I'm a feminist, if I identified as a feminist, I would say, well, screw you. I don't want it. I want my own. Women should have their own category because we're
Hmm.
awesome. Future is female. Um,
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Feminists, let me know how you think in the chat, right? Like, I am very curious about that, about what people think about this.
And this is, I think that, I mean, this is a much
Yeah.
larger issue
Just,
than could be covered in
I was
one program.
I'm just looking at this close up of Michael. This is the look of a man trying to figure out what the hell is my co-host getting me into here.
Like, hopefully this will be the thumbnail for the show. My look of like,
Yeah.
oh, dude.
Originally, you're like, well, I don't think there's much to say about this. Let's just move along. And I'm like, wait a
You
second.
know, I here's the thing. I mean, you know me. I never want to shy away from these things. I think that this points to something pretty deep, which is there are multiple ways to do inclusivity
Ooh,
that can look diametrically opposed.
tell me more, Rabbi.
So because here's how I'm framing it in my head, and I'm not saying that this is the sole way to think of it, but I think it's a way to think of it. You could say that by abolishing the distinction entirely and boiling it down to what are we actually judging, the quality of the performance, then that is being maximally inclusive, right?
I see the point, and as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of some differences myself here, which is with the branching genders, identifying more and more
Mm-hmm.
genders. It's
Mm-hmm.
a false equivalency to say, and here's why: because the conversations typically that are being had around those are things that are related to gender, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
transgenders
Mm-hmm.
ability to participate in college sports or the Olympics,
Right.
right?
Right.
Now
Right.
there are very good arguments on both sides of that because the physiology, blah 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 blah. This has nothing to do with
Mm-hmm.
any of that, right?
Right.
This is acting, and acting
Right.
is
Exactly.
one of those undeniably egalitarian professions
Exactly.
where I have favorite
Exactly.
actresses and I have favorite actors,
Mhm.
and I like them
If you
for
have
the
the
same
ability to
reason.
express yourself, right, you potentially can be a fantastic performer.
Right, right.
So no,
Well,
that is maybe what it is. And I think you've done something that I actually find very useful to do is sort of boil things down to their essential elements and say, okay, what are we actually talking about here?
yeah.
Are we talking about something that has to do with the thing, like you say, athletic performance?
Hmm.
Or are we talking about something that doesn't have anything to do with the thing at all? A theatrical performance. And if we're talking about something that doesn't have anything to do with the thing, then the way to be inclusive is to abolish any consideration of gender whatsoever, whatever gender you might happen to be. And then when we're talking about things where gender or gender presentation is potentially an issue, uh, the way bathrooms are organized, um, the way gender exclusive spaces are organized. For
Yeah.
example, in shelters for people experiencing homelessness, you'll have one section for women and children, another section for men, or different shelters entirely for those populations. So that's something where an area where it could come up.
Right.
Um, so then is where it's more appropriate to talk about different gender identities and gender presentations,
Yeah, and
something like that.
where
Maybe
it's
not.
really interesting to me is language has the power. right? Language has always had power, but I think the world is kind of waking up to that fact now. I'm seeing more and
Mm-hmm.
more and more hashtag words matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Language is violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could debate that. We could debate that.
Right.
But what's
Right.
undeniable is that just by people talking about language as violence, they're giving it power.
Mm-hmm.
And power is something that you give to
Precisely.
something. And that's what we're all about is language in
Right.
the industry that I operate in, that we operate here at Multilingual.
Exactly.
And I just wanted to bring up this. This is something that I was looking at last night. I'm sorry, this is not on the agenda.
No,
Um,
that's totally fine. Bring it on.
but this is fascinating. It's Assembly Bill 218 in
Mm-hmm.
California, and I hope I got the right one. And lots and lots and lots and lots of boring stuff in here.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of interesting stuff too. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot. Anyways, what's relative to language in here is it's mandating an updating of the California codes to remove all gendered languages. And
Mm-hmm.
what happened was an aide, a staffer, I believe, was going through and looking at like the job descriptions and the codes for attorney generals, and it was always
Mm-hmm.
referred to as he, right?
Mm. Mhm,
And they said, okay, well, let's change that. And they did.
mhm,
And, cool. I like
mhm,
that because it's,
mhm.
attorney generals don't need to be he and she. Language
Clearly.
purists may cite some style guide that says use the masculine form instead of blah, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah, blah. But language purists will be replaced by the language purists of tomorrow, right? Language evolves. Get over it.
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
actually kind of went down the rabbit hole last night. I was looking at this and I was like, I wonder how much work that would be to update. And a lot of
Mhm.
California civil codes are already reflective of gender neutral language. So they say he or she.
Right. Mhm.
And it got me into, thinking about like, well, what about in the penal code? What about when
Mhm.
referring to defendants or prisoners?
Mhm.
Like that's
Mhm.
not an honorific term, so do we replace that too?
No.
It brings up these questions, and then I started thinking, well, what about in the European Union, where all of these laws and legislations and codes and stuff have to be localized into a ton of
Mhm.
different languages?
By law. Yep.
Who's going to do that? Right? That
Mhm.
is a massive TM update project. Right? So
That is
that's why this is interesting to me because, like,
absolutely. There are two things I want to say about this. One, I'm thinking about the California one specifically. So what do you do when you're talking about reproductive rights and issues around that? Because that is usually going to involve female pronouns.
and usually,
So do you remove all
I'm not
those too? And there's some
not
people who
touching that
argue
one.
that you should.
Not touching that one. Yeah,
So
but we live in
that's,
an age
I mean, that's
where
something to
men
think
can
about
give
as
birth.
well.
Yeah, we live in an age
Right.
where men can give birth.
So I,
So
I could see their argument there.
yeah,
Also, so going to the European Union one that you're, or the example that you gave there, that is not only a massive TM update, that is a massive, and I think people who don't speak inherently gendered languages don't understand just how massive it is sometimes. Undertaking to figure out how to either paraphrasistically or somehow tweak some matrix feature of the language to be completely gender neutral. And we're not just talking about like gender binary inclusive. You
no,
can, with the addition of slashes or middle points or whatever, you can make most languages pretty male female binary inclusive. But to make them completely gender neutral is exceedingly difficult. I,
yeah,
I just actually yesterday, or I think it might have been today, was reading something from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Greece. And I was realizing as I was reading it, because I think about these things, this would be so much work to make completely gender neutral. It like I can't even imagine the amount of work that would have to go into it because there are so many things because Greek has three genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. And it would be so incredibly hard to, in every instance, when you're referring to a person.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's one thing. Point of clarification, right? Because like I was educated by Mercedes Montero, and I did an interview with her on
Hmm.
one of my other frickin' narcissistic podcasts that I do. Link in the description probably. And she laid it out for me. She's a Spanish linguist and she studied this.
Hmm.
She teaches this. And like
Hmm.
she just was really able to explain it to me in a way that made sense to me, which is like,
Hmm.
look, this is a phenomenon that's happening with language. Let's take the controversy out of it, right? This is a
Right.
phenomenon that's happening with language. As
Absolutely.
language providers, whether we're translators, whether we're LSPs, it's our job to serve our customers. And part
Hmm.
of serving our customers is advising them on things that are happening in the language.
Right.
And
Right.
so we need to be aware of these things.
Hmm.
And this is just completely opinion here, is, or prediction, I would say, is I would hesitate to be investing if I was, well, not if I was a government. Governments don't care about spending money. If I was an enterprise, I would be hesitant to investing a ton of money into updating my TMs until the dust settles a little bit. Because right now, I think there's so
I would
much
agree.
conversation about how, like, everyone's in
Uh-huh.
agreement, language is evolving. No one's in
Yeah.
agreement on how, right?
Right.
So,
No, yes, that is 100% right. And I think the water is muddied in the case of multilingual, multi-ethnic sort of confederations like the
mhm,
European Union, because there will be some languages, and that's the thing. By law, every law has to be in every EU language.
yeah,
There will be some languages where that's not going to be an issue at all. Some EU languages don't are completely gender agnostic. And then there are going to be languages like Greek where it is exceedingly difficult, and there is no real common on the ground agreement of how even to do it, as you just sort of alluded to.
yeah.
The dust has not even kind of settled
Well,
yet.
and that's what we're talking about. Like, hey, this is opportunity for us
Mhm.
in our industry. You know, whether you're on the
Mhm.
client side, like, figure it out, take the lead, take charge. People are looking for a
Right,
leader here.
right,
People are looking for someone to step up and be like, "This is what we're going to do." No one wants to stick their necks out there. And
right.
if you're on the supply chain side, you know, I don't care if you're a linguist, a consultant, you know, LSP, salesperson. Doesn't matter. This is the opportunity to really be able to educate ourselves so that we can educate others about this.
Absolutely, absolutely, and really take part in a very alive and important societal conversation,
Hmm.
right? Because when we work in language, what we are doing is intimately connected with human activity by its very definition.
Here's what I would like to do. So I'm going. I just had a flash thought because we got some time here.
Mhm.
If you're watching this, if you're watching this, you work for an LSP or you're just some translator with access to a TM and a web scraper. I would love to scrape all 29 California California codes, all of their legislation, their constitution, all of their state documents, and do an analysis, do a word count analysis, and put together a rough estimate of what is this going to
Fantastic.
cost to update everything in the industry. And if you're watching this and you can do that, I don't have time. I just don't have time. And I don't want to randomize my poor team with it. But that would be super interesting. And then
That would be
come back on a
incredibly
Venn
fascinating.
diagram and talk with us about it.
Yes,
Because
yes,
that's
please.
what I couldn't find. How much is this going to cost? There's no budget allocated for it. So California can pass a law and say this is going to happen, but all right, well, where's the money? Right?
Yeah, and how much money and who and how and all sorts of things.
And
Yeah.
who's
Oh.
going to be invited to that RFP when it
Uh-huh.
comes time to
Uh-huh.
do that? They're not hiring staffers sitting in Sacramento to update this. Well, I don't know. They might be, but doubt it.
Could be. It's a possibility, but yeah.
All right, which dead horse should we beat next here, Michael?
Yeah. All right. There are two dead horses. that I want to get to. That's some imagery right there.
Yeah,
But there's
thanks for
one of
humoring
them.
my California tangent. That was not
Oh
on the
no, you're
agenda.
absolutely welcome. I was born in California too, San Francisco native right here, so I get it.
Okay.
Um, I want to talk about two things. I think the thing that I want to talk about is after the thing that I want to land on.
Okay.
And the thing I want to talk about next is actually ESPN and Stephen Smith and saying that Shohei Ohtani shouldn't be speaking Japanese as much as he does. Even though he's
Yeah, what was...
Japanese.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Tell me
now
about this, because you
that
did
we're
this
a
one.
podcast too, so I will read it in my podcast.
Yeah, you read it. Is there video of this? Is there an audio recording? I can try to find it.
I don't believe that there is. Well, maybe there is.
Okay.
Maybe there is. But I'll read this in my podcaster voice while you're looking for it.
Go for it.
ESPN's Stephen A. Smith says it's not good for baseball that Japanese sensation Shohei Ohtani doesn't speak English with the media. Smith argued that Shohei Ohtani hasn't helped MLB's popularity because he uses an interpreter, and that using an interpreter doesn't draw fans because they don't know what he is saying. This brother is special, make no mistake about it, Smith said on First Take on Monday. But the fact that you've got a foreign player that doesn't speak English, that needs an interpreter, believe it or not, I think contributes to harming the game to some degree. When that's your box office appeal, I don't think it helps that the number one face is a dude that needs an interpreter so that you can understand what the hell he's saying in this country. Smith's comments drew some criticism, including from members of ESPN. So I have like 100 things to say about this, and I'm going to narrow it down to a couple. And full disclosure, I started out in this industry as a Japanese interpreter.
Okay, so I'm curious. I'm curious whether you and I are going to agree.
In this fight,
okay,
big time.
I don't, but I'll still disagree with you if it's
awesome.
fun. If it's fun to do. All right. So what's your take?
So my take is one that this is a very ahistorical take. I don't know how many people remember Ichiro, and here's full disclosure again, I do not follow baseball. I just have no interest in it. But Ichiro.
But you follow Japanese.
I do follow Japanese, and I especially followed Ichiro because he was actually a member of the local team when I was going to school in Japan, the city that I lived in. He was a member of the local team, and then he went to the Mariners, and he got really famous. He had an interpreter for the longest time because his English wasn't that great. Okay, fine. Not a problem. And I usually, in most cases, I don't have too much patience for people who say, oh, you're in America, speak English, because English has no more claim to Americanness than any other language does that isn't, for example, Navajo or Cherokee.
Fair point. This is your regular public service announcement that America does not have an official language.
That is correct. It does not have an official language. Yeah. And its indigenous languages have, unfortunately, almost no purchase here. So I think it's ahistorical because he seems to be just completely forgetting that this is hardly the first time a Japanese baseball player has spoken through an interpreter. Like, this been a thing since the 90s. But the other thing that I think is interesting is this. This is ignoring the context in which a lot of the rest of the world is expected to interact with other parts of the world, especially the Anglophone parts of the world, through interpreters. And people don't really make a big deal about it. Just the other day, as a matter of fact, there was a guy from, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he is from Poland, and he was talking on one of the Greek channels about coming to one of the local Athens football teams, soccer teams. And he was he was speaking English, and then they had subtitles in Greek under it. Two things here. One, he was a Polish, I believe, person speaking in Greece, but speaking English.
Yes.
And there were subtitles.
My brain hurts.
Here's the thing. I'm sure plenty of people had opinions on this in terms of how fit he is for the team or not, or that kind of thing. but nobody's had that I've known of has said a word about the fact that he was speaking in English, or the fact that there were Greek subtitles and that that's how they had to understand him. So something that a lot of the rest of the world does and is kind of expected to do, to be honest, um, it is somehow a matter of a bone of contention for Stephen A. Smith. And I actually like Stephen A. Smith. He said some things that I thought were incredibly right on. But on this one, I was like, what are you trying to say here? Now he's gone back and said, I'm just trying to say basically he is an incredible, like probably Babe Ruth level baseball player, and he's not getting the attention he deserves because of this. But if that's your point, then critique the mentality that makes people feel that if they're hearing something through an interpreter, that they don't have access to what's going on. So much of the rest of the world is expected to interface with the rest of the world through interpreters. Like what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it. I mean, there are so many rabbit holes to go down with this. I mean, because this ties deeply into a lot of things about people's agency over their language and language and power and how they interact. But yeah, I thought it was a really poor take on Stephen A. Smith's part. And to be honest, I feel like it's one of those things that if he thought about it a little bit more, he'd probably go back and be like, oh, yeah, that wasn't my finest moment. But maybe, you know what? Maybe he would stick to his guns. And then I would just have to be like, no, man, you got this one wrong. You just got it wrong. But it's interesting. I guess the note that I would leave it on is to say it is interesting in a world where English has so much power, probably more power than the actual number of people who speak it would really indicate.
It's power such that it's not even, it's just a norm. Right?
Exactly.
Because when you say like it has power, that's like implying like, oh, English is like this force that's out there exerting power. It's not exerting its power, it just is. Like English doesn't have any more power than bedrock does under.
Right, that's true. People just, you make a good point. And that's the ultimate expression of its power is that people don't even, it just sort of is at this point.
Yeah.
And is taken as a default, which is strange because non-native and native speakers combined, only 20% of the world speaks it. But that, I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into that. But in a world where English has become such a fixture, let's describe it like that, and so many people are expected to interact with the world, especially on any kind of international level, via English, and English has even become very problematically synonymous with multicultural. Native speakers of English somehow take umbrage at the idea that they would have to interact with the world.
Yeah, I don't know that we take umbrage with it. It's just we're spoiled. I mean, you know, when you take away a kid's lollipop, they take umbrage to that too, right? I'm super spoiled. I do not need to learn another language to get where I want to be in life.
Right.
To get to where I want to be in life, I, as a native English speaker, do not need to learn another language. And you know, at
least you're conscious of that.
It is what it is, right? I'm not, you know, I didn't do anything to deserve that, but yeah. I mean, okay. Without getting into it too much here, I would just say that this is interesting coming from the language industry because we're all about interpretation, right? Like that's what we do, translation and interpretation. So it's like to say like, I really want to be clear here that interpreters provide a vital role, right? And
Absolutely.
I think that if someone wants to, if someone feels more comfortable in being their authentic self in their own language, then they should be able to do that. Now,
100%.
do I think that he has a point, that Smith has a point, though? I do. because I'm also about localization, which is adapting your product. I'm going to get some heat for this. Adapting your product for a local market, and
Uh-huh.
in Major League Baseball, the players are essentially a product, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that or not, I'm not saying that's good. I think there's atrocious things that happen, particularly with collegiate sports, where
No,
players
worse.
are very much monetized, manipulated, and controlled and taken advantage of. But I think he has a point. I don't. I'm glad that he's not the final decision maker, though, because I would
Yeah.
personally like to respect his right to speak Japanese.
Uh-huh. Well, and that's the thing. I agree with you that he does have a certain point, and it's not what he's saying cannot be immediately dismissed or kind of hand waved over. There is something he's saying that really does have to be wrestled with, because I, it drives me up a wall when I see Anglophones coming to other countries and thinking, "Oh, hey, I don't have to learn the language because I can speak English."
Yeah,
Like,
no,
no,
yeah, me too,
come
me
on.
too, me too. But
So,
but I would challenge you. Do you have that? Do you hold yourself to that same standard for Japanese people coming to America?
well, and that's the thing, and that's why I say that has to be wrestled with. Okay,
Yeah,
let's think about that.
yeah.
Maybe you should. Now, I would say there are
This
some
is not.
differences
This
in
is
terms
not
of
the.
indigeneity of language,
Yeah, I was just
but
gonna say this is not the answers podcast. Like we don't have answers here. We
no, it
just.
isn't. No, it's a really, like I say, there's a lot to this. There's a lot to this issue, big time, big time.
Well,
I
sir,
want to.
we've got
Yes,
5 minutes.
we've got 5 minutes. Let's talk about mindfulness.
Mindfulness. Yes. So I was looking at. Is this the one? All right, I'll check it out here. So last and final topic: mindfulness meditation can make some Americans more selfish and less generous. Mindfulness developed as a part of Buddhism, where it's intimately tied up with Buddhist spiritual teachings and morality. Mindfulness in the US, on the other hand, is often taught and practiced in purely secular terms. It's frequently offered simply as a tool for focusing attention and improving well being, a conception of mindfulness some critics have referred to as McMindfulness. I like that. Oh, I should probably bring this up. I'm sorry, guys, if you can't see that. Um,
Now you
mindfulness
forgot we were on video and
now I
you
forgot
forgot to
what,
bring the
gosh,
picture.
herding cats here. Mindfulness and Buddhism developed in Asian cultures in which the typical way in which people think about themselves differs from that in the U.S., specifically collectivism versus individual. We're going to talk about collectivism versus individualism with 4 minutes left. Wow, that is ambitious.
What, you mean we can't do that?
We can try. According to a unit, well, we I have the San Diego, I think, Loc Lunch, which is coming up. I love those Loc Lunches, but I can be late to that. According to a University of Buffalo study, among relatively interdependent-minded individuals, a brief mindfulness meditation caused them to become more generous. So, in collectivist societies, mindfulness leads to being more generous. However, among relatively independent minded individuals, and that would be me, mindfulness appears to make them less generous with their time. Interesting. And I think this is fascinating. And I told you I want to talk about this too because, mindfulness, there's an app for that now. There's 20 apps for that now.
There,
There's
I was going to say
global.
there's an app. There are many.
Yeah, so there are like global mindfulness things. This isn't like something that you have to travel to some obscure country and study with a monk for anymore, right? So what does that mean? Because it's something that is incredibly cultural, and how do you adapt mindfulness across cultures, or do you? Right? And it's
And
just
that's
the one statistic just that I was looking at before this, and I want to say to sound smart, is that mindfulness is a $1.2 billion industry expected to grow to
mercy.
2 billion in 2022. So in the
Uh-huh.
next year. And wow, I really meditation, something about letting go of earthly troubles like money,
Hmm.
is worth a lot of money, it turns out.
Ironically. Well, and I think this brings us to an interesting question of how what is so universal that it can kind of be its essence can be distilled and then localized for a different audience. And is mindfulness one of those things? Maybe mindfulness is one of those things, but the particular way in which mindfulness is practiced needs to be localized. An argument could be made that prayer in the various Christian traditions is a
Mhm.
form of mindfulness. Meditation in the Buddhist traditions
Oh,
is a form of
absolutely.
mindfulness.
Absolutely.
The five times of prayer a day in Islam are a form of mindfulness. So when, like, what kind of mindfulness, I guess, really in this case is being offered here? Is it a particular kind of mindfulness, or is it the concept of mindfulness? And if it's the concept of mindfulness, isn't that something that we've had some version of? We just didn't call it that. We called it prayer, or we called it quiet time, or we called it, yeah, I mean, the concept of meditation has been a thing in American society for quite a while. So is it just something, are we just calling something that we've always had some manifestation of by a different name? I would really want to see what's actually going on here
Well,
underneath the surface.
and once again, it comes down to language, right? It comes down to words and
Mhm.
what do we call
Right,
things, right? What do we
right,
call religion? What do we call
mhm,
spirituality? What do we call,
right.
and these are things that are going to be very different. The fact, like the number and type of words used to describe such concepts are
Mhm.
going to be different. The fundamentals of language are going to be different when
Absolutely.
describing these things. And,
Right.
to me, this is it's a religion. This is what's happening. I think with the the world's, particularly Christianity. It's just not hip anymore, right? Which
Mhm.
breaks my heart. But people still need to scratch that spiritual itch, so they're turning
Right.
to these secular forms of spirituality and getting
Right.
the spiritual itch scratched there. And great, I love it.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Where anybody can fill that need. I don't care if it's in a church or a synagogue or
Right.
with a Headspace app, right?
Mhm. No, whatever does it for you, and that's the thing. That's why I think I take that sort of attitude toward it. That it feels like, in a way, we're calling the same thing a different name because there are people who don't identify with the other names that might be attached to more particular religious practices, and that's fine. That's totally fine. Like, if because of the way your personal cosmology works, the word prayer doesn't work for you,
Yeah.
cool. That's totally cool. Call it mindfulness then. I don't care. Like, but if like you say, if you've got that spiritual itch, or we won't even call it a spiritual itch, because some people, that would bother some people
It
too.
would. It would.
Psychological itch, let's just say.
Yeah,
Um,
but the reason to me, like, this is an interesting subject, particularly for the localization, the language industry, is
Absolutely.
because this is a hot button item, right? And
Big time.
there's certain topics that words really matter, right? Really, really,
Very
really
much.
matter. No one cares what you call your screwdriver. Well, you could actually do some interesting things with the word screwdriver,
I was
but
gonna say,
no one cares what you call your um, wow, I was about to say
table.
spoon. Table. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No one cares what you call your table. IKEA, looking at you and your Schlugeldorfen furniture. And I will buy it and I will love it. I don't care what you call it. But the difference between, a simple word like church and synagogue that I used earlier,
Absolutely.
big difference.
Absolutely.
Big
And
difference. Words.
simple,
Yeah. So
right?
comes full circle. We started off this episode talking about words matter,
That's right. And we come
and
back to, indeed, words matter.
57 minutes later, words still matter. So
There we
I'm
go.
happy to report that. Well, Michael, I don't think we have time for a lightning round, but I'm just happy
I don't
that the
disagree.
internet connection. This is our first episode from Greece. Um,
Yes.
did we talk
And
about
the
that?
internet connection seems to be cool.
Did you tell everybody that you moved to Greece? Did we talk about that earlier in the episode?
I referenced it, but yes, the
Oh,
first couple of episodes I was from Washington State in the U.S., and now I have successfully relocated to Athens, Greece, where I will be living from now on. my beautiful family.
That is so awesome. So, multilingual editor in Europe. Multilingual comes to Europe.
Yes,
We're spreading.
that's right.
You guys are spreading across the
That's right.
globe. Well,
Yes, our flag has been planted in the Mediterranean.
well, I'm glad you landed, and I'm glad, and that's why, by the way, we haven't been doing these for a while. Like we did like one or two
Yes.
episodes, and then we just took like 6 weeks off. And
Yeah.
I've been doing other stuff on other channels, going live. I've even been kind of chilling out on that, hitting a reset button, because we're basically just playing around with stuff here at Multilingual, and I'm playing with stuff over at Nimsy to make sure, like, how can we get you guys? What do you guys want? Right, so reach out to us, reach out to Michael,
Yes.
reach out to Mario Line over at Multilingual. You can reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, suggestions on what,
Ideas.
yeah,
Yes.
what we can be doing, or if you
Yeah.
would like to buy
Because we want to
products and
talk about
services
what you
from
want to
us.
hear about.
Exactly. We need to plug Multilingual Mercantile is up. I don't know if we've even been advertising that, but I think it's a soft launch. If you're interested in multilingual merch, we've got cool. I've been sipping my coffee this morning out of my multilingual mug, wearing my multilingual hat. Go check it out, mercantile.multilingual.com. So, with that, let's get us out of here, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Venn diagram with Michael Reid and myself, co-host. Why, if I'm the co-host, why am I doing the outro? Michael.
I don't know.
Take us out.
But you do a really good job of it. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a good rest of your day or a good evening, wherever you happen to be, and we'll see you next time.